Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Alec, and I'll be here in the background to help answer any general or technical questions that you have. But before we start, I'd like to go over a couple tools you'll have throughout the session. The audio control is located directly beneath the slides in your console. Please adjust the volume by sliding the indicator on the right-hand side of this panel. Also, please be sure to adjust your computer, speaker, or headphone volume as needed. There will be no dial-in number for today's webinar. Here are all the tools at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question about those, you can just hover your mouse over the icon and a description will appear. But I'll go over a couple important ones for today's session. The blue one here marked group chat is where you can chat with your fellow attendees during the presentation. And please send your questions and any technical issues that you have via the Q&A box. That purple icon there marked Q&A. Just type in your question and click submit. A link to the recording of today's webinar will be provided in a follow-up email. Please allow at least 24 business hours before that information is sent. A PDF of today's presentation can be downloaded on the right-hand side of your screen in the resource list. And your HRCI and SHRM certification codes for today's webinar will appear in the upper right-hand corner in that certification box after the required watch time has elapsed. All right, now a little bit of information on today's speaker, Karen Hebert-Maccaro. She is the Chief Learning Officer at AthenaHealth, a healthcare technology company headquartered in Watertown, Massachusetts. In this capacity, she oversees all learning and development, from new hire to executive development. Prior to joining AthenaHealth, Karen held several roles at a large biotechnology company, including Director of People Strategy and Analytics, Vice President of People Development, and Chief Learning Officer. In the latter position, she oversaw all performance management, high potential identification, leadership and executive development, and learning, training, and organization design efforts. So we are very happy to have Karen with us here to speak. So without any further delay, Karen, let's get started.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. And thank you all for joining today. And thanks to the CLL webinar series for asking me to share a little bit about the work we're doing here at AthenaHealth. I'm excited to do that. I suspect that the topic of today's discussion will actually be similar in its dynamic to many of the challenges and opportunities that you are all facing in the organizations in which you work. And I suspect in some ways you might see some things here that we are further along in the development of, and in some ways we may not be quite as developed as some of you and some of the organizations that are out there. So I hope that in sharing this case study of our recent work, we will be thought-provoking and also useful to all of you. I'll start by explaining why I titled the presentation, Bringing the Learning to the Learners, and primarily it was because this seems to be one of the most common themes I'm hearing in the learning world today. There are many arguments to be made that what I call point-of-need learning is more efficient and more effective for the adult learner than removing them from their daily work and immersing them in a classroom-based experience. And what you didn't hear in my introduction is that I spent much of my early career in academia as a college professor, and so classroom-based learning experiences are by no means obsolete, in my opinion. I would argue that when they are expertly designed and delivered, classroom experiences remain one of the most valuable ways to learn and grow. But they are certainly no longer the only way, or maybe no longer even the primary way. So that's why I named the title of this presentation, Bringing Learning to the Learners, because that's what I want to talk about and how we're trying to approach that here at AthenaHealth. So to bring us to our next slide, I want to talk a little bit about how we learn, not we at AthenaHealth, but we in general. How do we learn today, and how that's changed? We know that more and more learning is being done in informal and self-directed ways, such as doing things like daily web searches, or sometimes it feels like hourly web searches, or following podcasts, or reading blogs, or attending webinars like this one, which we're doing now live, but that will be available in an asynchronous format and more on demand. And we know that learners are consuming knowledge and skills from many sources that they can access directly from their personal devices, from their phones and their tablets. And at the same time, they are engaging with formal experiences like formal online courses and instructor-led classroom-based experiences less frequently, right? And so what do we do with that? We have several options, and I know that a knee-jerk reaction is to suggest we just have to dramatically reduce the amount of classroom learning that we provide, and I'm not sure that's the answer. In fact, a recent report by Burson, which was called The Future of Corporate Learning, indicated that of all the benefits that employers offer today, millennials in particular, and I know we talk about millennials a lot, but it's the upcoming workforce and we've got them in all of our organizations, value training and development benefits above all other types of benefits. The survey that they did, that Burson did, showed that 22% of millennials desired learning and development benefits, compared to 19% of them indicating the most important thing was flexible work schedules, and 14% of them who were citing the importance of cash bonuses. And if you think about that, 22% wanted development opportunities versus 14% wanting money. And again, I would suggest, or the way I interpret that, is that there's a clear mandate for strategic L&D efforts being embedded in the people processes of most organizations as one of the weapons, if you will, in the war for talent. So how do we create learning experiences that enable us to deliver the type of development activities that our workforce wants today, that balances all types of learning modalities? So if you believe what I just shared as a mandate, then we need to be thinking as L&D professionals how to design, deliver, and align our work to this new shift, or to this shift in approach. And this is a quote from a piece that Deloitte University Press released in February of 2016. And it emphasizes the need for L&D to do two things, and it really caught my eye. The emphasis here is on content curation and experience facilitation in order to enable employees to drive their own career and professional growth strategies. So let's take a look at both of these terms, starting with this notion of content curation, and these will be key to how AthenaHealth proceeded in trying to meet the learners where they are, and so we'll get to the example in a moment. So 5 years ago, whenever I thought about curation, I thought about it in terms of art galleries and museums. Today, companies have knowledge curators embedded in their business units whose job it is to wrangle information sources into searchable and usable repositories of knowledge, right, to create that ability for people to get the answer to their question quickly and to share knowledge with others. The same thing is largely true in L&D. The need to curate knowledge for our learners has become equal to the need to create it, in my opinion, and everyone today is a knowledge creator. And I personally love the many implications of that fact, but I know that it creates some challenges as well. So at AthenaHealth, we asked ourselves, how do we, as the corporate learning and development department, curate highly relevant knowledge and experiences in a way that reduces the burden on the learner to sift through thousands of Google search returns or YouTube videos? And we made an argument that if we did this, and we did this well, we believe that that would add substantial value to the learning and development efforts of our employee base. So shifting to this notion of experience facilitation, it's also something we spent some time thinking about. We have all known for a long time that learning happens everywhere, right? If you think to the 70-20-10 model that was prevalent for some time, 70% of learning happens on the job. And it happens in our informal conversations and in our informal network building about 20% of the time. And then, yes, sometimes it happens in the classroom. 70-20-10 indicates that might be about 10% of our time. Modern L&D organizations, I think, need to embrace the entirety of this spectrum, all 100% of the learning, and we need to take some degree of ownership for it. We need to teach the teachers, usually our managers and leaders. We need to build in on-the-job learning experiences and point-of-need support into everyday role and work. And also, we do need to continue to provide more formal experience that punctuate the career trajectories of our learners in key places and solidify and reinforce the most important learnings in multiple ways. So I think this is the journey that we're on. I think we are in the process of shifting with the way learners learn, and some of us are ahead of the curve and some of us may be behind it, but we're all working towards better understanding this new defined world that we live in when it comes to content curation and experience facilitation. So a little over a year ago, I described the state of learning at AthenaHealth this way. We had an extraordinarily rich tradition of classroom learning, either multi-hour, multi-day, or sometimes even multi-week learning experiences that taught everything from sort of the most general professional skills to very specific functional skills for people who were coming into roles like sales positions or account management positions. And we had a pretty immersive experience in our new hire orientation programming. And we had managers and leaders who attempted every day to live our cultural statement, which was something that was very unique when I joined AthenaHealth to learn that we have a cultural statement that quickly follows on our vision and our mission statement that says we are teachers and learners in it for our mission. And this is something that we hold pretty near and dear. But what I realized was that even though we have this rich history of trying to embody that teacher and learner philosophy, we had not done a lot when it came to point of need learning. So on-demand, virtual learning that could be done at the actual point of need. Question arises, you know where to go, you know how to find the answer, you know how to grow your skill set. So as a result, I believe we weren't reaching as far into the organization as we could, and we weren't reaching everybody who needed to be reached. And so my team and I, working with the organization's leadership, began to explore a mechanism for making learning more ubiquitous in the lives of every AthenaHealth employee. Not to eradicate the traditional experiences, the immersion experiences, or the facilitation of practice-based experiences, but to round out our portfolio by creating more on-demand, at-the-point-of-need learning experiences that would do just that, create a more ubiquitous learning environment for our employee base. Our solution was the creation of a more robust learning ecosystem. And this concept of a learning ecosystem is not original, and I'm confident many of you have heard about it and or built versions of your own. I should also state that it was never our intention to build an ecosystem model and declare success, wrap our hands, and walk out. By its very structure, we recognize that it will require a continual modification and evolution. So we knew when we were getting into this notion of building an ecosystem that we were going toward a strategy with some pretty profound implications for staffing, for expertise requirements, and also for organizational engagement levels. You know, we need the organization to embrace the notion of more self-directed learning within the corporate sphere in order for this to work. So why then did we jump into this ecosystem project or ecosystem model of learning? And there were many, many reasons why, and I have the intention of making this presentation more about Q&A than I do about me talking, so I don't want to go into all of them, but I thought it would be useful if I highlighted what I would consider three of the most significant reasons why we did it. The first is that an ecosystem approach emphasizes that it is important for us as L&D professionals to look at the environment and the processes in which the work of the company takes place, and then to determine how best to support or create value and remove barriers to learning and performance optimization while actively engaged in the tasks of the role. In other words, we actually want to bring the learning to the learners where they are in their role and make it easier for them to do their jobs. The second reason we did this is that the ecosystem extends the impact of the L&D organization by providing learning and performance support in a more varied manner. And at Athena, this is something we absolutely wanted. So I talked about the sort of striving for the ubiquitousness of learning. Our CEO has been known to say that he wants learning to be infused in the walls of this place, And there's a reason for that, because we want people to continually embody this notion of teaching and learner as equally important as employee inside the organization. And so this was one way for us to vary our impact and extend it deeper into the organization. And to tie to that, the third reason was that an ecosystem-based strategy allows us to scale and to deliver learning and the performance optimization efforts to an organization that was growing rapidly, is growing rapidly, and to one that is geographically dispersed. So in other words, I guess I'd sum it up like this. Our strategy of using an ecosystem approach was adopted because it would meet the learners where they were at the point of need and in ways that would maximize individual and organizational performance, put the learning in the walls, if you will, and it was the most efficient way that we could think about scaling our delivery and providing the types of experiences that we know our population wants. So we went to the employee population in the form of a lot of different mechanisms, blog posts, team meetings, classroom experiences that we were already running, to share this vision of an interconnected learning ecosystem that provided our employees with an architecture from which they could drive their own learning while cutting through that massive noise that exists in the form of, the internet, search results, email, and so on. And we did this by marrying two analogies or comparisons. This concept of the ecosystem was the first, and then secondarily, we used the concept of an underground train system. And as you can see from this slide, we used a track-like image to introduce this concept. So we took this notion of the ecosystem and a subway system, and we merged them together, and then we went further to sort of re-educate our population, re-educate them on what it takes to learn and to be successful in our environment by explaining a little bit more in depth what we wanted each of these tracks and the cumulative system to look like. So what we said was that each track within the ecosystem would be focused on a particular topical area and be comprised of multiple stops along the track, just like an underground railway might be. And each of those stops are likely to be in any number of various modalities. So for example, one track might be managing others, and it may contain dozens of stops or learning assets or learning experiences that ranged from traditional classroom to online games to article and book recommendations to discussion forums to assessments to toolkits. The idea here was that if someone wanted to become more skilled in how to manage people, he or she would be able to go to one location, which we housed on our learning management system, and access a curated set of experiences that we felt were aligned to our business, for one, our culture, and our values, and that would help him or her advance their knowledge and skills in this particular area. We found that we also had to explain this a bit more for some of our population. The concept of learning modality was something that we wanted to put out there in the broadest possible terms, not worrying about whether or not there was overlap between, say, for example, mobile learning and podcasts or e-learning modules, which probably could be accessed by a mobile device. So we didn't really worry about the wording so much as we wanted to cast a very broad net so people understood that we thought learning could happen in any number of ways and in any number of forums. We wanted to explain that our intention was to provide a whole host of ways to engage with learning day in and day out. And we wanted our employees to know that if they received feedback at any one point in time, that there was a skill gap, or if they self-identified as having a gap, they could go to this place on our learning management system and search for a topical track that might be well aligned to that gap. So for example, if they had been told that they needed to improve in their presentation skills, that they could go to our communications track, and they could, in that very moment, if they wanted to, watch a video that we had curated on great presentation skills or the use of body language in presentations. They could read an article on that topic, and they could also register for an upcoming event that we were going to host, whether it be virtual or live, that would allow them the opportunity to go deeper or to practice their skills, or both. And so the idea being that we would have almost a one-stop shop for people to get highly relevant and multiple modality experiences at the point of need, regardless of whether or not they happened to look on a day when we were offering a particular live event. We also built tracks with the intention that they were, for the most part, not exclusively, but for the most part, consumed in any order, and we provide some guidance for stops that we thought were, for example, best for newer managers versus more experienced managers. But in most cases, we really were looking to set the knowledge free and limit the barriers to access as much as possible. Now, the reason I say for the most part is in some instances we sort of reserve the right to have prerequisites or restrictions, such as we have some experiences that are by nomination only, and they may be a part of a wider track but accessible only to those that have been nominated in a particular period of time. We also created the expectation that tracks would overlap. And this is where the ecosystem really comes into play. For example, you might have a stop on the communications track that I just referenced that focuses on presentations to executive audiences that we would also include in the managing people track because we made the assumption that managers in particular may find themselves in this situation and looking for some guidance. This is not to suggest that arguments couldn't be made for many of the stops to live on multiple tracks. But again, this is where the judgment and the curriculum design expertise of the L&D team is going to add real value. And so going back to my earlier comment about curation in the art world, the similarities strike me as being prevalent. It's a subjective act for a museum curator to select pieces of, say, impressionist art from the many available artists and bodies of work. But when he or she does it well, it hangs together, and I did intend that pun, it hangs together for the viewers and the museum goers in a way that is both compelling and highly relevant. And this seems to me to apply equally to today's L&D professionals in the work that we all must do. To try to succinctly define the ecosystem presented a bit of a challenge, but we wanted to articulate a simple description, and this is what we came up with. AthenaHealth's learning ecosystem is an environment designed for the learner, filled with created and curated content on various topics and delivered via multiple modalities. The impact we hope to have includes increased engagement with learning experiences, and therefore we intend increased employee engagement, because you remember the millennials who value development experiences higher than money or flexibility as one point in that column. We also hope to have more point-of-need learning for efficiency and productivity, and we hope to have more scalability, maximizing our capital investment in technology and our people investment in the sphere of L&D. So I was told in preparation for this speech that one of the things that folks find very useful is when we talk about outcomes and lessons learned. And so I'm going to just briefly go through a couple more slides, and then I'll open it up for questions. So our outcomes. First, let me say that this is still very much a work in progress. We launched 3 tracks in 2016, and I would say our initial indications have been positive. People within AthenaHealth really do want more just-in-time learning. We have had support and engagement from our senior leaders, including a willingness for senior leaders to serve as guest curators in our ecosystem on topics for which they have a great depth of expertise, and we're very excited about that. We haven't launched a guest-curated track yet, but we hope to do it. We are seeing, slowly, the balance of how people are engaging in learning at AthenaHealth shift from exclusively in the classroom to increasingly through other methods, including formal e-learning and informal self-directed learning experiences. So while I think we have made great progress, I am not convinced yet that there aren't challenges left to be met. First, due to the fact that we sort of co-opted our existing LMS to provide a user interface for the ecosystem, we've not been able to fully track engagement with all of the stops on the various tracks. And so what we don't yet have is the ability to be truly analytical in what's working and playing well with our audience and what isn't, not at least against every asset that we have out there. And we'd like to get there, and we intend to get there, and that will help inform how we shape future tracks. Second, we have a cultural and behavioral shift that's still underway. I joked with my team that I was most afraid of building the ecosystem and having no one show up. The construction of the role of L&D in many people's mind is still pretty traditional, sage on the stage, kind of classroom-based learning. We need to shift that. We want to be far more engaged on a daily basis with the learning that is happening in our organization in all forms. And I think that means inserting ourselves in ways that are valuable time and time again so that we redefine the vision of L&D in the minds of our employee base. And I am convinced we're on that path, but I think we will probably have to continually work to get people to see the value of creating an architecture as opposed to strictly being at the front of a classroom. And third, we have to fight the battle of relevance, and I don't think this is distinctly unique to creating an ecosystem. I think this is the challenge of L&D in many ways, regardless of the modality or the mechanisms or the strategy that you're trying to deploy. How frequently we are refreshing our content, however, in order to maintain relevance has changed in the last several years, and I think the expectation is much higher that we will continually refresh content, responding to the changes in the market and in the workplace in ways that are more rapidly occurring than ever before. And so it'll become increasingly important and also to some extent challenging that we align with our business unit leaders to ensure relevance and to ensure that the content we have feels as though it is aligned with the needs of the organization and current to all of our employee base. My very last slide. Again, I was asked to share some thoughts on what I've learned on the journey so far, and I would say it's been incredibly important to have the backing and the support of the senior-most leaders of our company. Our cultural statement, which I mentioned earlier, and which challenges all of us to be teachers and learners, has been critical. It's an amazing part of our corporate DNA, and it meant that my team could anchor our work toward helping accelerate that cultural value quite easily. And so I know that that was something we were fortunate to have. Even with the great culture of learning and innovation behind you, I think communication is key. This was a major change initiative for AthenaHealth, and I think it would be for most organizations. And to treat it as anything else, I think would be a mistake. So, follow change management principles would be a lesson I learned. Engage your coalition, create a dissatisfaction with the status quo, and be prepared to deliver. We used a very high-profile test, if you will. We brought a virtual game to about a third of our organization in the very early days of this initiative, and we collected a lot of data on how they responded. It was a bit of a new type of learning experience within the walls of the company for most of the learners, and we were fortunate to get a ton of very positive feedback. It was sort of like dipping our toes in the proverbial waters, and we got a sense for the willingness of the employee population to adopt this type of learning and to engage in it very fully. And so I would suggest perhaps that could be a valuable way of building support from the environment or the company at whole. Promotion. We probably haven't done enough of this even yet, but whatever mechanisms exist in the organization to bring the message to the employee base, I think should be utilized. And that could be, meetings and advertisements and blog posts and other forms of communication. But it's important, especially at first, so that people can build the confidence in the assets and in the experiences that they get from engaging with the ecosystem that hopefully produce value. And then our hypothesis is that when we get some repeat users who are really big advocates, the word-of-mouth promotions will reduce the need for us to do some sort of promoting from the center, at least a little bit, if not entirely. And then this goes without saying, perhaps, but ecosystems are living things. They evolve all the time, and they must in order to survive. I think the same is very much true of our learning ecosystems. So we know we have to revisit, revise, and relaunch routinely. I think I'm going to call that the 4 R's. And finally, connecting to the notion of this being a major change for a lot of organizations, I would just say I learned that I can't expect it to be without bumps. There may be naysayers or challenges with the technology investment or misses in the content alignment, but we are L&D professionals, and so my advice would be to turn every bump into a learning moment and to move forward, because if we don't meet the learners where they are, I'm afraid we run the risk of obsolescence. And our work is too important. It helps optimize the performance of individuals and corporations, and I, for one, consider myself extraordinarily lucky to be engaged in this type of work. So thank you for letting me share my sort of informal case study and tell you about the work we're doing here at AthenaHealth. And I look forward to your questions, and so I'll turn it back over to Alec.
All right, Karen, thank you. At this point, like Karen just said, we are going to proceed to Q&A. If you have a question for Karen, click on the purple icon that is marked Q&A, type it in, and then click Submit. With that, we already have quite a few here in the queue, so we'll get started on these. And we're going to start with one, Karen, from Pablo, and Pablo is asking, so what have you done to promote the learner's engagement with this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Pablo. Thank you for asking it. So we are working hard to do this in a number of ways. I mentioned a few of them in the talk. I mentioned that we're promoting this from the perspective of several of our existing communications platforms that are corporate-wide here at AthenaHealth, but we don't feel like that is sufficient. And so my team and I are working hard on alternative mechanisms for engaging our learners in this. And one of the things that we are trying and are in the early stages of trying is identifying people who could be early adopters, members of the organization who will go in and promote this with their teams and actually help us make it better by asking them to be involved in determining whether or not the content is the right content. If there are things that we're missing, will they share it with us? And so by sort of being co-writers or pioneers of this ecosystem, we can get, we're hoping, more engagement across the organization and also have the double benefit of making the content increasingly relevant because we're getting the input from others who are theoretically the users of this set of experiences.
All right, great, thank you. We're going to move on one here from Diana, and Diana asks, did you roll out the tracks to all employees? And how do you, again, about engagement, how do you engage the people managers in using this as part of their development conversations with their teams?
Yeah, great question, Diana. So yes, we did. We rolled it out to all of Athena's employee base, which is approximately 5,000, it's over 5,000 people now. However, I would note that one of the things that we are doing, and I didn't spend a lot of time talking about this in the presentation, but at the very beginning I showed the slide with the globe, and I talked about how we have a rich history of other types of learning experiences. And so one of the things that we do is we have a new manager immersion program where we encourage all new people managers to attend within the first sort of year or so. We say between 1 and 3 years of management, but at least have 3 months of management experience to be in the program. And it's a multi-day live program. And in it, one of the things we do is actually take them through the Managing Others track on the LMS, and we encourage them to work with their people use it as a tool for them to have conversations with their folks about, skills development and opportunities for professional growth in general. We're in the very early stages of this, and so part of it would be really interesting to be able to come back at some point in the future and say, how much push have we gotten through the organization organically, and are our managers really using this tool? I hope to be able to say very soon that we're getting really widespread adoption, but like I said, we're in the very early days.
All right. Karen, we're getting a lot of questions on the tracks, so we're going to start with one here from James, and James is asking, have you targeted any tracks towards specific objectives of improved results in any area of the organization? And if so, how is that going?
Yes. Okay, great. So, James, we started with the main tracks of managing others and communications and onboarding in the organization. They all have their objectives, and what I am interpreting your question to mean is, do any of them have very specific tactical or functional objectives, like teaching people how to sell our products? We have not put those tracks out yet, but we intend to. We're having conversations with the role-specific education, which would be sort of like functional training sub-teams of our corporate L&D group, about how do we take that and put continuing education, if not onboarding and continuing education, into a track-based form to allow people to continue to grow after they've entered the organization in their respective roles. So right now we haven't done it. We are in the process of building our fourth track, which is on leadership skills. So we will hopefully make that, venture into that. And then the other part of the question that I interpreted to be in James's comment was about assessment, like how are we going to assess this? And one of the things that we're working on right now is thinking about, pre and post assessments and how might we embed them into the tracks, because you'll recall that we talked about these tracks being things that by and large, not exclusively, but by and large, people can do at their own pace, on their own time, and in their own order. So we're trying to figure out how do we learn from the tracks whether or not we're improving the knowledge and the skills of our employee base. And not to suggest that learning in this type of an online ecosystem is not different, but we all face the challenges of measuring the impact of our programmatic efforts, whether they be traditional in the classroom experiences or far more asynchronously based. So we're working on that right now. We haven't cracked that nut, but we've got some interesting ideas.
All right, great. Moving along here, another question about the tracks. This one comes from Matthew. And Matthew asks, how have you helped your employees assess which tracks they need to engage?
So that is an excellent question. One of the things that we're doing right now is relying very heavily on our management and leadership teams across the organization to do that at a unit level, not at an enterprise-wide level. I won't be coy about it, though. I have a fairly grandiose hope that someday we'll get to the point where we might look at it more universally or more enterprise-wide and see where we have skills gaps in some of our critical path positions or other parts of the organization where we're really trying to build a strong expertise well, and then sort of go to the use of some system like the ecosystem to target that and then to assess that. So I hope to do that, but right now it's being done more unit by unit, business unit by business unit is what I mean.
All right. So, like I said, we are getting a lot of questions about these tracks, and this one comes from, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, Aid. But this question is, do you find that there are any redundancies in some of the learning track courses, or are the courses on each track distinctly different from one another?
Yeah, excellent question, and there are definitely redundancies. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier was that we didn't worry too much about classifying what a modality was. We're also not worrying too much, at least not now, because we're talking about 3 existing tracks, a 4th one on its way with a target of 3 more in 2017. So we're not talking about dozens and dozens of tracks yet. But we are not worried right now if there are redundancies. We've actually sort of gone out very blatantly to our population and said, there are going to be redundancies in these tracks, and then some of them we're going to call them out. We're going to say, look, this is a specific overlap between tracks because we see the value of developing your skills as a manager. You can't develop your skills as a manager without being an effective communicator. So we do see redundancies. We're not worried about that in any way. We actually call it out. But I think the question will become, as we grow this ecosystem, let's say we fast forward 3 years from now and we have 25 different tracks, whether or not the redundancies cause problems if we cannot expose them in a way that make it easy for the learner to know that there is a redundancy, and if they've done one thing, they don't have to necessarily go and do the other thing. So we are cognizant of it. Right now, we've just owned it and said we think it's a good thing. There's connections here, and we want you to see them, and we call them out. But eventually, we may have to deal with this in a different way.
All right. Thank you for that. This one is kind of a question that we get a lot when we have presentations on different learning programs, and this one comes from Susan, and Susan asks, do employees do the learning on company time or on their own time?
Yeah, so I don't know if I have a lot of data one way or the other, but I have a hunch. So this may not be an accurate answer, but I suspect most of our employees mostly do it on company time. But I suspect that a good portion of our employees engage with it on their own time as well. So I think it's probably a mix. I think that if we require the training, they're more likely to do it on company time. If it's a face-to-face experience, they almost exclusively do it on company time because we're scheduling them during the work hours. But if it's an asynchronous experience, like reading an article or conducting a self-assessment or something like that, I think the lines are blurring for a lot of the workforce, not for all of the workforce, but the lines are blurring to some extent, and professional development slips into, what you might consider as off hours because it's so much easier to download an article and read it, as you're taking a bus home from work. So I think there's a piece of the fact that our learning is becoming more sort of ubiquitous and everywhere and easily done while you're standing on a bus, that means that more of it will migrate to be integrated into life. But I still think a large percentage of it is happening on work time, especially those more formal experiences.
All right. This one here comes from Liz. And Liz is asking, how does onboarding and learning plans fit in with this program?
Yeah. So at the moment, we have a track that is a continuation of our formal and in-person immersive onboarding experience. And so what we do is we bring people through a multi-day immersive onboarding experience, day 1 to day 4 of their employment at the company. But then we have a track-based set of assets or stops that support them in the first, let's say 90 to 120 days after they've joined the company. And so we're integrating this blended, if you will, style of learning for onboarding. And we're doing that now quite actively. So they engage with watching videos and online e-learnings post their official NHO. The training that goes on after onboarding for people who are in very functional roles that require very deep product or service knowledge is primarily happening in a traditional classroom today. However, we do expect that there will be some evolution in that as well.
Okay, we are getting a ton of questions rolling in, which is great. It's great stuff. We're going to keep going and answer as many as we can answer. But this next one here comes from Heather. And Heather's asking, do you have an opinion as to what modality of learning companies should focus their resources on if they have limited resources? So which one has the biggest impact and what do you think sticks?
Yeah, so, well, Heather, that is challenging question because I think so I'm going to be idealistic first. I'm going to give you my perspective with regard to the fact that the joy of creating a more varied ecosystem is that you can not only meet learners where they are, but you can meet learners by learner type. And we all know, that the learning types of people vary. The style of the way they prefer to learn varies. And so things like, reading is helpful for some people and less helpful for others. And watching a video is a preferred method for some and not for others. And so it's incredibly difficult, for me to say which one is more effective because I think there's a high degree of variability, and that's part of the beauty of going multimodality. But I also don't want to be so idealistic that I don't recognize that with certain resource constraints, constraints, you may have to focus. And so here's my, I hope a somewhat satisfactory answer to Heather, but at least it's my honest answer, which is that I would worry a little less about which modality, video, written, e-content modules, and I would worry more about whatever modality seems to be the best fit for your workforce being delivered in continuous, small, bite-sized chunks of learning. Because I think that is more and more the overriding preference, is that people aren't sitting down for an hour or two or days, but instead they're consuming their learning, whether it's video or reading or, e-modules in very short bites. And I guess I would put my money there, regardless of which modality I chose, to try to improve the likelihood of adherence and engagement with the learning material itself.
Okay. They're continuing to roll in here. This one's from Allie. Allie asks, how do you maintain interest and manage continued usage? Allie says, we often worry about launching flavor of the month learning initiatives.
Yeah. I worry about that too. And Allie, I don't know that I can tell you yet, because we've only just been doing this for months, not years, whether or not it'll fizzle out and become a flavor of the month. I hope not. I believe not, because I suspect that, this is the way that we are all going to increasingly want to think about our own personal and professional development. I'm sort of betting on that horse. But I recognize that it is a challenge, and you can't chase after the new shiny thing all the time. Here's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that if we consistently drive people towards a single source of learning and development experiences within our corporation, if those experiences are high quality, and if they align, if they are relevant, if they align with the needs of the business units, with the people who are in those business units, and if they are promoted and supported by integrating that mechanism, for us, the ecosystem, into performance management, succession planning, and other sorts of people processes with the support of your senior leaders, that we won't have to worry about that, because it'll become a part of the DNA of the organization. It's no small feat to do those things, so I don't think that what I just said means, wow, just do all that and you'll be fine. I think it's a challenge, but I think that it's what we have as an L&D organization of today. It's what we're going to have to figure out how to do.
All right. Thank you, Karen. We are kind of plugging away at these. And the next one is coming from Tammy. Does your talent team and learning team exist under one structure with different leaders? And if so, how do you drive this type of initiative when talent is driving their own learning strategies?
Excellent question. I can speak to it from many points of view. In organizations where I've been in the past, they've been one and the same. In this organization, they're a little bit different, meaning that the L&D organization and sort of the folks that are responsible for performance management and succession planning and everything aren't necessarily under, the same senior leader, but recently we've made that combination, and I think what we're going to see is a tighter connection. Primarily, what I think is important is that you are integrating with not only the performance management systems and structures, but with the business units, because when you do that, then the leaders within the business units are holding their people accountable to the development goals and things of that nature. And so it almost reverse engineers that problem. So it's about tight connection, of course, with your people processes, and I think that can be a challenge if there's not an integrated strategy. We didn't always sit under the same person, but we do now, and I think there's going to be a lot of good in that, and I think it'll align us very closely.
All right, Karen. The next one comes from an attendee also named Karen. Karen asks, how did you decide which skills and behaviors to target for your learning tracks given the variety of roles, tenure, and performance of your staff? Yeah,
great name, Karen. An excellent question. So I would say that we could have gone anywhere. And so, in fact, that was a little overwhelming. We almost got, paralyzed by the fact that there was any number of ways we could begin to think about this. Here at AthenaHealth, though, we had been really strongly pushing this idea of management development, of providing our managers with all the tools and all the resources and all the knowledge that they needed to be successful. And so it became obvious to us that regardless of all the competing priorities, an overriding one that would help everybody, regardless if they were in our commercial operation or if they were in our G&A functions, was the stronger development of management, because that would that would be the tide that lifted all the boats. So we started with managing others, and we then went to communication, because we also felt that that was something internally that we could do that would be applicable regardless of the functional area you were aligned with. And in the early days, we really wanted to have the widest possible impact. We know at some point we'll begin to get specialized enough that it'll have less than a full enterprise-wide impact, or it will be maybe a little less geared towards some parts of the enterprise. But in the beginning, we really wanted to have those cross-functional skills that would help people regardless of function or role, as a way of getting engagement and as a way of sort of teaching people to learn in this fashion inside the organization.
All right. So at this point, we are going to continue. We still have about 10 minutes left. But if you have been here in the webinar for the entire time, in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you should now see your HRCI and SHRM credits. So you can please take note of those. But moving along here with the questions, we have a question from Matthew, and his question is, a trade-off of curating the best of the web is that the content is not specific to your organization. What have you learned about how users value content that you build in-house versus the best of the web content?
Yeah, what a great question. And I think the way that we're approaching it right now is that it cannot be an either or. It has to be an and. If we were to build an entire track, at least this is our current assumption, if we were to build an entire track of only curated best of the web, best out there experiences, then we would feel that we were somehow or another, even if we were very carefully selecting the best of to align with our cultural values, our work, our mission, and the type of industry we're in, that we would disorient people just enough to make it less than fully satisfying. And so what we're doing is we're creating a both. And so we are, every track has both curated and created content that is specific to AthenaHealth. And one of the things that we can't do yet, which is a source of frustration that I mentioned in the presentation, is necessarily see how people are responding to those pieces of content or assets or stops along the tracks that are curated versus created. And we know what they're doing in the created ones more than we do in the curated ones. We know how they're responding to them. So we're getting some subjective information, and so far the balance seems to be working really well, but it's subjective, and we really are going to be moving over the course of the next several months to trying to get a better handle on data to support, is there a percentage? Does it have to be 50-50? When you tip, below 30% created content, do people stop engaging? I'd love to have those insights. I can't say I do right now.
All right. We only have you for a few more minutes, so let's get a couple more in, and this one comes from Danielle. And Danielle asks, do the tracks include required regulatory coursework, or is this strictly elective? And this is something you may have touched on in the presentation, but Danielle was wanting.
Yeah, so it's a great question. Primarily what we've got in there is elective work today. However, there's nothing that precludes us from embedding, so let's say, for example, in the managing people track, if we have a compliance-related asset, we could certainly put it in there. The other thing is that we could put anything that's required as people enter the organization in the new hire track, and that would allow people to sort of go ahead. And remember, the way we've built this is on our LMS. So regardless of what their point of entry is, in a track or by an email that we send them to remind them that they have a regulatory obligation to complete a particular training, they're going to get credit for it on their transcript. And so we can track it regardless. So there's nothing that suggests we couldn't put in relevant tracks those areas of training that are absolutely required, not just from a regulatory perspective, but we tend here at AthenaHealth not to have too many other required trainings, but we've been tossing around the idea of what do we want to require, if anything, and even if it's not regulatory or compliance related, we could require people to take certain things when they become a new people manager around just upping their skills in that area or learning our performance management philosophy. And if we were to do that, we also see no reason why we couldn't embed that in the tracks. We may have to give it additional attention to drive people to that asset, but it's embedded in our LMS, and it can be tracked, and it can be audited, and it can be reported on. So there's nothing that precludes it.
All right, Karen, this is going to be our last one, and this one comes from Damon. Damon asks, how would you describe the support provided to senior leaders when curating the sponsored learning tracks?
Is the question, Alec, how would I describe the support they provided or the support we provided them?
I would interpret this as the support that you provided them.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you the following. We did something that I think helped a great deal with regard to the launch of these tracks, which is we used an existing system. It has its negatives, and I mentioned some of them, but because the LMS was already an existing system, because people already went there to complete their trainings in many cases or to register for training and learning development opportunities, one of the things that it enabled us to do is to sort of just catch people who were already using an existing tool. So, and it wasn't terribly complicated. In fact, it was quite easy for them to get into the tracks if they were already on our LMS and to see what that was all about. So one thing was we didn't make any new scary interfaces or confusing interfaces. Now, that caused us some problems, which I mentioned, and we're reevaluating that. But it certainly did allow for that one convenience for busy leaders who don't want another thing to have to log into or figure out how to use, right? So that's one thing. The second thing that I would say is that, this notion of communication and engaging with people so that they understand how to use it. One of the things we're contemplating right now is the creation of what we're calling track guides, for lack of a better word, but sort of one-pager or, one web-pager versions of how to use the track if you're a senior manager in the organization, how to use the track if you're an entry-level employee, and to give them some more guidance around the use cases of our track learning systems. And we hope that that will be helpful as well. And then the last thing that I would say is that, we believe that the biggest thing that leaders and managers can do is to engage in helping us make sure that the content is relevant. And so we're constantly asking for input, whether it be an invitation in a blog post or in other mechanisms to ask people to help us shape this stuff, which we believe not only helps us, but in return will then help them because it becomes more relevant, more useful, and more valuable, and they'll be able to use it as a tool to help develop their folks. So that would be three things that I think we're sort of in the process of trying to engage with our community to help them engage with us.
All right, Karen. Well, thank you. You are actually now off the hot seat. That was a great Q&A session we just had there, and thank you to all our attendees for participating in that. We still had a ton of questions in the queue, but unfortunately we do not have time to get to all of them today. But Karen, again, thank you for taking the time to present today. And I want to also thank today's sponsors at Cornerstone OnDemand, but mostly I want to thank all of you in the audience again for your participation. We had a great crowd show up today, so thank you all for that. For those of you who asked, you can find materials from today's webinar and all other Chief Learning Officer webinars at events.clomedia.com, or click on that Chief Learning Officer icon at the bottom of your screen right now. And again, like I said a few minutes ago, you should see the HRCI credits in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Please take note of those now, as they will disappear after I close this webinar out, but you will receive that information in a follow-up email as well if you do not get that now. So thank you once more to Karen, our sponsors at Cornerstone, and our attendees. We'll see you all back here actually tomorrow for our next CLO webinar titled Enabling Learning, How McDonald's is Driving a Learning Technologies Foundation to Accelerate Global Change Capabilities. And that starts at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Have a great day, everybody.